Do we have our amazing speakers with us? Hi, I can see both of you on the screen. Good morning.
Hello.
Good morning.
Good
Good morning.
morning.
Wojciech and Stefan, hello.
Good morning.
Where are you connecting from?
I'm in Warsaw today.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm in Brussels today.
Okay. Right, so let us introduce you to our audience, and thank you for waiting just probably 2 minutes. Wojciech Skrudlik, VP Poland Global Hub Lead, GlaxoSmithKline, and Stefan Bielen, Deputy Branch Manager and Asset Servicing Director, Euroclear Bank. And gentlemen, I'm looking at you and I'm recalling our prep conversation, which I enjoyed a lot. And remember, in that conversation, I shared that you are the perfect fit for this segment and for the conversation. You're bringing leadership role, leadership experience, but also an experience with change management and transformation management. So,
which feels like we've raised the bar high enough.
I guess so. I guess
pressure.
so. No pressure at all. And I think the new element in this conversation is my great colleague and co-host Łukasz.
Tall white male.
Yes, branded as tall white male from yesterday. So again, welcome to a very valid conversation on change, on the role of leader in facilitating change. Earlier, a few minutes ago, we talked about the power of habits, the power of simplicity, but also ways of empowering individuals in facilitating change. And with you, the two of you, we want to bring the perspective of leadership in facilitating the behavioral change. So why don't we start with understanding your realities and your observations on what environment are we operating in. If we make a statement that small steps lead to big results, and we really want to emphasize and push this approach, is it really possible within the environments that we're operating? What is the business environment or just the context that we're operating? How supportive is it or not?
This, if I could go first, this is quite an important thing. Environments, and when I say environment, I mean mostly the culture of the organization. And I know Stefan also can nod here probably. We are so privileged that our organizations are very supportive when it comes to culture and D&I being part of it. And this is such a great place to be, because then wherever you are in GSK offices across the globe, you see that this is not only executed in 1 or 2 places, but this is everywhere. And our top leaders, including our CEO, CFOs, and other senior leaders, are simply not only talking about it, but also walking the talk, which is even more important than just talking. And this cascades to the bottom of the organization. And this is such a powerful thing, because this is embedded into almost the DNA of the organization. And that's why it's a bit easier. I'm not saying it's impossible to do anything and lead D&I without such a cultural, environmental support, but it's simply more difficult, I think. With this being part of the culture, it's I think easier, and you don't need to hide it. You don't need to have difficult conversations with your leaders. Why are you spending time on D&I? Because they know this is part of the day-to-day. And there should be time dedicated to those things.
So in your case, this exact behavior became a habit. The day-to-day behavior, day-to-day routine, it's already embedded in the organizational framework or culture, right? That's what I'm hearing you.
It's expected also. Yeah, it's expected. It's measured. It's part of the culture, goal setting as well, and also every year we assess through the survey, GSK survey, how we're doing. How is our inclusivity across the organization, which is a great metric to track and see. Okay, are we winning? Are we losing? And what can we do to be better?
I can see you're nodding, Stefan. What's your view on this small steps, big impact approach, taking your experience and the perspective of your organization? What's it like?
Yeah, so from our organization, Euroclear, we are not so big. We're about 6,000 people across the world, but we have about 80 nationalities. So historically, inclusivity has been one of our key features to be successful, right? So I think we're definitely at the side of the diversity boosts quality and performance. I think that's a given for us since we started our existence 50 years ago. And in that perspective, I think linking it back to the small steps and to the role of the leaders, I still use the same model that I was introduced to about 20 years ago, which is what is called the influencing model. And basically what it says that as a leader, there are basically 4 components you have to worry about and 4 components you have to make sure you drive, right? And a lot of examples were given, I think, in previous discussions the last day and a half, which are in that frame, right? So the frame, to make it easy there, you can look it up if you want. It's in a paper from McKinsey about psychology of management and of change. So essentially it says that as a leader, linked to what was said in the previous debate, first you have a role modeling need, right? Because you need to role model the change and the inclusive culture that you want to see. That's a must, right? But also, and it was also said, you need to equip your people to be able to do it. Yeah? And that's, I can relate to that later on. In our company, we put a lot of effort to this because being inclusive as a leader, it's easily said, but it's very difficult for people to do. And it's not so much the skills on how to have conversation. There's a lot of, like you said, bias, beliefs, fears usually that block that, right? And then getting the conversation to the fears, we see that it's very impactful to liberate the leader to be inclusive in his posture. Right?
Yeah.
The third component is that you really need to have it, and it's what my colleague just said, you need to have it anchored as an objective of your company, right? And there it needs to be understood by people why it's important, why we want to do it, and you need to create a conviction with people that this is what we want to do. And then the last one, where we also experiment a lot and where we evolve a lot, I think, is on the reinforcing principles. So you need to have practices, principles in your meetings, in your day-to-day, every day, that secure inclusivity. And because if you don't have that, you quickly, I see in our experience, you derail because, and not by intention, but just unintentionally, you will lose inclusivity if you're not really having strong processes to guide people through that. So these would be for me the 4 components. And then maybe a last point on you might say it's 20 years old, so why is it still relevant? Well, I think it is still very relevant. The only part, and I don't know if it's the same for my colleague, where we see we need to emphasize more is the part on the conviction. What's in it for you? I see with the young generation around me in Krakow, there's much more wish for them to understand, yeah, but what's in it for me? So you need to really have meaning and purpose, being strongly positioned and communicated. That's the one from the 4 that stands out, I think, more compared to maybe 20 years ago.
And to your earlier point, I also think being honest and expressive with your own personal why and your own personal benefits when communicating to your team, right? Because that's what also people need and want to hear. And we don't hear it, I think, often enough. Interestingly, I think, Stefan, you really addressed the first question from the audience. Our audience has a question like how to make sure that the leader, especially at the top level, leaders' words and statements are seen as true examples and not just typical statements. And I think you have covered it partially.
I want to raise the bar even higher for you from my own experience. I do a lot of public speaking coaching at C-suite level, CEOs and management boards. And one of the things I've noticed over the years, obviously when you're on top of a pyramid in any organization, you will discover sooner than later that a lot of people are not telling you the full truth. They're tapping you on the shoulder because you're on top of the pyramid. So at the end of the day, years pass and you discover by going to an external conference to talk about whatever it is you're doing in the company that, 20% of the audience are yawning and the other 20% is looking at their smartphones, etc., etc. So someone is not telling you something. And that brings me to my own personal theory of 2 F's of humility. There are 2 types of humility in leadership. One is fake humility because it's fashionable, right? So people are smart enough, intelligent enough to put on a face of humility in an organization. And we can detect that. Whenever we sense something is inauthentic, it's, as it's stated in the question, it's a typical statement in an organization that doesn't feel authentic. So authenticity, going back to the roots of really understanding why something matters. And now back to the question, perhaps.
Yeah. And I see.
I cannot agree more. And especially looking at the newest generations like Gen Z or Alpha, showing up on the horizon, they have some kind of a detector for fake, for corpo, blah blah blah, and they don't buy it. So to your questions, it's so important to some kind of have it in your heart, believe it 100%. And not only talk about it, but actually walk the talk, as I mentioned, because people are watching you. People watch the leaders, and if they see discrepancy between what they say and what they do, it won't work at the end of the day. So one things which from my experience I'm happy to share is sometimes being a leader, you don't know everything. You very often don't know everything, and especially in the D&I area, in my case, which actually was one of the reasons bringing me to GSK, understanding such a great culture here. Was that I don't know everything, and I'm not super good in some specific areas of D&I. So I was quite transparent to my team. Guys, I need to educate myself, and I made some steps, connected with some D&I ERG groups, had one-to-one conversations with the team that leads the LGBT plus ERG group, and actually upskilled myself to better understand, in order to better lead by example. And that's also okay to be transparent with the team and say, I'm not super great at everything in this area, but I'm happy to learn, and I will do it, and I will lead in this way. So authenticity is critical here.
Listen, I also have an experience from my earlier times. I worked with a fantastic general manager once, and he approached me one day and he said, "Basha, I need to be honest with you, and probably that's something that I don't want to share with HR people. I really don't understand fully this DEI, as a leader, as a manager, as a general manager. Can you help me out? Can we take some small steps? Because I'm not getting it fully, and I'm in a position to shape, to influence, and I'm also expected to support, culture and narrative. So yes, speaking of small steps, small disclosures, and still authentic.
And I think before we get Stefan's perspective, I would add one of the things that we're not talking about at this conference, and therefore my question is going to be again completely disruptive and unrehearsed, would be, what's the biggest risk why leaders are careful or tread carefully when approaching DEI, especially some of the subtle issues of DEI? It's risk management, isn't it? Because once you start asking people about the things that are on the cross-section of so-called private life versus professional life, you think that once you start digging into those territories because they matter, because you want people to feel comfortable in a workplace, as Jennifer Brown puts it, you want to bring your whole self to a workplace, because only then you can put your entire motivation into the experience. But at the same time, the risk there is that people will be perhaps they will not appreciate the effort fully. They will be oversensitive, entitled, egocentric, self-important. So the risk is there that it becomes a lot more about me, myself, and I, and a lot less about business goals, which you should, at the end of the day, also respect. There needs to be a sense of balance between business goals and the fact that it's a workplace, and engaging 95 of the conversation about my needs, me, myself,
Yeah.
and I.
But you're saying you're bringing your authentic self to work as a leader, yet serving organizational goals.
That's why it's such a delicate equation. Stefan,
Do we have a question then? Is it a question to our guests?
what's the Brussels perspective?
Well, I'm in Brussels, but as I'm operating as a head in Poland, so I can more say it from a Poland point of view.
Sure.
I think to your point about keeping track of what is happening and not being authentic yourself only, but also seeing that things are happening. What I see works very well is that we, from the leaders, we're not pushing things to be done, right? We create conditions for people to step up and to volunteer. So for instance, when we started a couple of years ago, it was more a sort of invitation where we asked people who wants to work on D&I and who has ideas about it. And like this, naturally, we bring together people who actually want to take leadership in the teams on that. And you see then that they actually get things done, right? So because they have things close to their heart. And if you frame it then to your overall company objective, yeah, where you want someone to discuss with them, okay, but you're going to do this, but this is still in line, then I think you can actually get a nice balance between actually the words that are put there, the objectives that are put, and actually things happening, right? Things being implemented by the people themselves on what they believe what is needed. Yeah. And then we went as far to give them a bit of time and budget even for it, so that they don't have to do this all on top of, and that they really own it, and they come to you and explain, okay, but you know, Stefan, you think we should work on age, for instance, but in the end, we think that this year mental health is more important. So this year we started a mental health group because they said more and more we see that's an issue. So I think there it's to create the conditions as a leader to first, yes, be informed about the topic good enough, but at the same time tap into the intelligence and the engagement of your organization, because that's how I see truly, things happening and the culture step by step being built. That's a bit in our organization how I think I try to support it as a leader.
Would you have anything to add to this, Wojciech? We can. Okay.
Absolutely. You mentioned being yourself, and I just immediately had an reflection that we can't actually distinguish between and have a separate like a border between work and life, because life with its domains and several domains like spiritual, emotional, avocational, parental, etc. domains overlap with work. We can't simply have those two separate worlds. Therefore, D&I is also, I think, in my opinion, acknowledging that those areas overlap, and we need to create a safe environment in which colleagues, for instance, who want to pray during the office hours have a space for that. Those who are parents or new parents also can have more time for their babies, or those who go through some emotional crises. They also can be supported by our colleagues. This is also D&I. It's not just this classical male men and women, etc. It's much wider than that.
And yet we are humans, human nature that is, which means we can be overly expectant sometimes. We can feel entitled at times. That can be an issue, and that can be a deterrent for implementing DEI policies, right? Or not necessarily?
That is correct.
Yeah, but it all comes back to me, to the conversation, right? Because as you indicated, Wojciech, also, if I look back in Brussels, where we have quite a large population with a different religion background, meaning Muslim, where they have Ramadan period, yeah. And I remember in the teams a lot of commotion around the fact, but on those days they cannot do late shift, how do we manage? And then I think you need to really be strong on, okay, what is the right balance between the individual need and preference versus what the team needs and what the company needs, yeah? And you don't solve that in 5 minutes, right? You need to have good conversation, and you need to talk that through so that everybody goes out and says, okay, I understand that if you give this, but in return I get this is fair, right? And that's the exercise to do. That's the discussion, I think, the conversation you need to have for people to embrace the inclusion, so that everybody feels like, this is feeling right and feeling equal. But it takes time and it takes effort to do that conversation, I believe.
Which brings us back to what Taz said yesterday, doesn't it? That conflict resolution and ability to mediate and really discuss things through in depth is a vital element for the future.
Yeah, yeah. Well, maybe we can take a bit of a future look, and since we're also kind of closing this segment and this interview, I really want to ask both of you, coming back to the role modeling of a leader and small steps, big impact, authenticity, true identity, wherever you're meeting someone for a coffee in the morning or having a one-on-one. How do you do that as leaders? How do you make sure that you're incorporating DEI principles in your daily leadership routines? Give us some recipes, give us some good advices.
Absolutely. And I'm such a great believer of baby steps, of the small steps. I don't know if you know this book, Pound the Stone by Joshua Matsoft. It's about, a man who tries to pound the stone by a hammer, and he does it, 20 times. Nothing happens. 30, 50, 70, 99, 100. And then 101, and the stone breaks into smaller pieces. And it doesn't happen because of that final 1 pound. It happens because of all of those pounds. Everyone matters. But the problem is with those small steps is they are not so visible, right? But they do matter, and they're important. So a few examples from my practice. We start actually, and I do it personally as well, by welcoming every new hire, and also already mentioning at this stage about D&I and how important it is, and actually asking them to follow and to spend some time on understanding these cultural aspects of D&I. Another very small step is the inclusive language. So speaking, for instance, colleagues with disabilities instead of disabled colleagues, right? Small change, but really matters. Also, he, she, etc., them, and using those small things. Inclusive meetings. As in the previous session, it was mentioned that we also do some kind of evaluation at the end, whether the meeting was inclusive, apart from making notes and taking care of the time. Did everyone had an opportunity to speak up, especially those introverts who really struggle? Those kind of things, recognizing on the fly, catching people on doing the right things, and recognizing the D&I leadership. Those are some of the examples of those really small steps. And even attending small meetings where we have just 4 or 5 colleagues who talk about LGBT topics, which give you an opportunity to learn their needs and what we can do bigger for the organization and for that community is another step. And you may say, is it worth spending time with 4 or 5 people? Yes, it is super important.
Oh, you gave us so many examples, like real examples, plus additional inspiration, the book inspiration. So thank you very much for that. Stefan, would you like to add any of your daily routines as a leader as we're aiming for applying some DEI principles into the real culture and the real leadership style?
But maybe the one comes to mind listening to Wojciech is that my reality in my office hours is 90% being in meetings. So I think in meetings as a leader, I think I do a lot of effort to get inclusivity. And how do we do that? Well, each meeting where I have the ownership, we start with inclusion. And this is a principle you can look up. It's really to include yourself first to yourself, then to the group, and then to the topic. And then we go into what is the stake, what do we want to get out of this? And then we get to processes to actually, indeed, like Wojciech said, have everybody having a say. And it's simple things, right? Where you would have the item explained, everybody has a thinking time, and then you go around with everybody's opinion, right? Because if you don't do this, you end up with the most vocal, the most courageous talking, right? So you get imbalance by design. So I think there as a leader, it took me a while, but accepting that there are probably smarter people in the room with respect to the expertise that is needed, right? To just take this power of listening and really just manage much more process and stakes And for the content, you can contribute, but that's not your goal. The content you facilitate, right? I think that's for me helps also to get much more inclusive meetings with much more opinions raised, and then a better outcome for the organization.
Well said. Thank you so much for this example. Hopefully it also took off some pressure from leaders and inspired them to do some of the micro behaviors that you have listed as an example of a fantastic tool, an effective tool. I guess we're ready to wrap up. And sadly,
and thank you, gentlemen.
It was such a great conversation. Sadly, we cannot continue any longer, but hopefully we can follow up at some point. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for sharing your experience.
Pleasure. You're welcome.
Pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.